if you think about the entire world's energy needs for a full year, terawatts, it's huge. The entire world's energy needs for a full year. The sun generates that every hour. This thermonuclear device, which wakes up in the morning, always works. It's never ill. It's always there. It always delivers. And the problem is at our end, we're not harnessing that power.
And I'm beginning to see that businesses, some of my clients are considering very much hybrid working. They are considering not releasing buildings. They're considering selling property. So they are, already done all the basic things like fair trade, tea and coffee and that kind of stuff, but they're now looking to much more fundamental changes in the way they operate their businesses.
That having that purpose and believing that you're doing something good, it reflects well in your personal life, but then on your outer family, your friends, when you're talking about it, like you seem to be talking about these subjects so much more outside of work and inside of work at the moment.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Making IT Happens by Sims podcast. I'm Andrew Henderson, CEO of Sims International, and I'm going to be your host today, discussing the topic of sustainability. I thought it would be appropriate to start with a quote from David Attenborough when he was talking to the world leaders at COP26 about the climate crisis. And he said, "In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could witness a wonderful recovery." And really on that last note, I'm delighted to be joined by three business partners of Sims, Roger, Craig and Matthew. And I'm going to ask each of them just to introduce themselves to the podcast. So Roger, would you like to say a few words about yourself and Jigsaw?
Morning, everybody. My name is Roger Whittle. I'm the founder and CEO of Jigsaw24. We're the UK's largest Apple reseller and environmental enthusiasts to the core, with hundreds of initiatives going on at the moment as we all try and move towards a better level of sustainability. So delighted to be joining you this morning. Hello, everybody.
Thank you, Roger. And Craig, the same, please.
Yes, morning everybody. My name is Craig Campion. I'm the Director of IT Asset Disposal Services at Stone Group. Stone Group are a manufacturer and a reseller of IT hardware, products and services. My part of the business is for the end-of-life treatment of IT asset disposal and what happens with those items, and very excited to be on here to talk about the product's whole life cycle from start to finish.
Thank you, Craig. And Matthew.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Andrew. I'm Matthew Morris. I have a small business called STEM Sustainability. In reality, it's just myself, but I'm an environmental and sustainability consultant working from Canterbury and Kent, and looking very closely at net zero 2050 at the moment and the various things that feed into that.
Well, thank you all, and we're delighted to have you, and thank you for your time this morning. Maybe starting with Craig, do you want to outline some of the initiatives that Stone are working on, and particularly the area that you're responsible for?
Yeah, so with IT asset disposal, predominantly what we're doing is we're offering customers a chance to recycle all their old equipment. So when a customer goes and buys some new IT hardware, what Stone will do is they will collect their redundant IT hardware, they bring it back to their headquarters in Staffordshire. We data erase everything with a data erasure software called Blanco, which is the only data erasure software that the government approved. Once it's been wiped, you cannot get any data off that device. And then what we do with the equipment at that point of view is any working devices we look to put back into schools, charities, startup businesses, colleges, to make sure that those devices are being reused to some sort of capacity. So Stone Group are accredited to zero landfill. We don't export anything outside the UK. So even when we get devices that aren't in a reusable condition, we work with partners, for example, that make the plastics into plastic bottles, as an example, and get reused from that capacity. So just to kind of set the scene on like IT recycling, like e-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world right now. And the UK is the second worst offender for exporting stuff abroad, which ultimately ends up going to things like landfill sites and stuff like that. And what Stone Group are doing is making sure those IT assets get reused within the UK and supporting organisations that need it, where they might not need to necessarily buy a new device. A refurbished device is more than adequate for what they need. So in terms of like what we've done, last year we did over 500,000 units. 80% of them went back out to organisations to get reused. And this year we're forecasting to do over 1 million units as well. So it's great that organisations are getting more switched on in terms of like what they need to do from an e-waste perspective and wanting to see what happens to their items in the back end. And we're here there to support them from that point of view as well.
Thank you. 1 million devices to me sounds a huge number. Roughly what sort of size team have you had to invest in to handle that number? And looking further ahead, do you see that growing, doubling each year, or what's the plan?
Yeah, definitely. When I took over this team 6 years ago, we had 5 salespeople within our team, and now got a team of 35 people. Within our operations team, we're now up to nearly 200 people working in our ITAD operations facility, which has just gone to a full 24-hour shift pattern as well across 3 shifts, which is absolutely brilliant because it allows us to put through obviously more items and process more items, which is what we all want. And we've just been awarded onto the National University Framework as well as the preferred IT asset disposal partner for recycling for all the universities as well. So that throughput's continuing to increase all the time in terms of like what we can do as well.
And you were telling me earlier, and I think this is really important. You can give great levels of comfort that, say, data that's on these machines, both how it's collected and then straight to Stone and erased. Could you just expand a bit more on that?
Yeah, exactly. When customers come to get rid of their old equipment, security is paramount to them because essentially they're giving devices away that have got their own data on there. From a security perspective, they need to be using someone they can trust. So by using Stone Group, everything that we do in-house and we do ourselves. There's no third-party involvement. We've got all the relevant accreditations and security levels that you'd expect from an IT asset disposal company. We're governed by ADISA, which is the badge that everyone looks for when they're looking for a recycling partner as well. But in terms of like the way the process works, a customer books a collection using our Stone 360 app. They go on there, they book the collection. Our driver goes to site to collect the items. So our driver turns up in a Stone van. It's a very high security van, it's fitted with CCTV. All the drivers are DBS checked. They load the items onto the van. There's a piece of paperwork the customer verifies that all the items have been counted, checked and verified before they're loaded onto the van. And all the items come back to Stone the same working day. So there's no like parking overnight or anything from that respect. So from a security point of view, the customer's got that peace of mind. They know it's a Stone employee picking those items up. They know they're coming back to Staffordshire on the same day. Once the items come back to Stone, anything that's data bearing goes straight into our Blanco data erasure part of the process. So anything with a hard drive will get plugged in. We attempt to wipe it. If it's successful, then great, that'll be reflected on the paperwork. If it fails, what we do then is we attempt to wipe it for a second time. If that hard drive fails for a second time, we take the hard drive out and we destroy that hard drive on site and we record the serial number before it gets destroyed. So from the customer's point of view, on the paperwork, when you're getting down to that granular detail of what's happened to each individual hard drive, it'll say, has it been data erased successfully or has it been destroyed? So the customer knows that all their items have been handled successfully from a compliance point of view and from a security point of view. What's even more important is what happens with the devices at the back end. And that's what customers are starting to ask a lot more now. Like when I first started this role, the 2 questions that I always used to get asked was, how are you going to handle my items from a data compliance point of view? And also, how much money am I going to get back for my old equipment in terms of rebates? What I get asked a lot now when I go do meetings, which are happening a lot more now, is what are you going to do with my data? How's that being handled? Which is still obviously very important. But also customers are starting to ask what exactly is happening to my items at the back end, because there's been some absolute horror stories where customers are recycling with organizations. And because Stone are quite unique in that we've got that sales arm of the business where we can sell back out to primary schools, we can sell back out to colleges. So if you think of a university PC that's 5 years old, the university's all excited because they've got their new devices come in, to a primary school that's down the road that's only got one new device in that classroom where children have to take it in turns to learn on that device. What we can do with that university PC, where the school's only going to be using it for basic Word functionality, a bit of internet functionality, we can kit that entire classroom out for the cost of one new PC for them. And everybody in that chain benefits from that because the university at the start gets a rebate for that old equipment as well. The school is getting a whole entire classroom, so all the children take it in turns, like rather than take it in turns to use those devices, they're all using those devices at one time because they've got a classroom full of equipment. And what we also do is we plant a tree for every collection that's done for the original organisation as well for them.
Thank you. No, thank you, Craig. That's good. I'd like now to move to Roger, and I think it's fair to say, Roger, you're almost the unofficial spokesman on all things green in the channel. Perhaps it'd be good to understand, where's your passion from, and what's motivated you to speak out so brilliantly about, as I said, all things green.
Well, thank you for those kind words, which I don't think are deserved. I think we've all realised, haven't we, together over the last few years. I mean, I don't know what it was with me. It might have been Greta starting to moan, 2017, 18, but it happened very quickly though. It was around then, that time. I can't remember the exact moment. There wasn't an epiphany moment on the road to Damascus, but I suddenly, very, very quickly over a few weeks, realised that we're in a terrible, terrible mess, and have since spent a lot of time on the sort of macro side of things. Quickly realised what we had to do. We had to do a mountain of work at Jigsaw, where we have got 330 employees, and you start off with the generalizations like, we all need to use less, share more, recycle, stop waste, source locally, and embrace new technology. And then it was a question for me of just working out the basics. Where are all the problems? What is this all about in terms of just learning about the whole approach to life? So, I'll put this whole category under evangelization. So where do the greenhouse gases come from? How many are there? What are the consequences? What does 1.5 degrees mean? All of these things which have started to become a lot more mainstream. And at the same time, I moved to an electric vehicle myself. And then COP26 came along, and you realize the true horror of the political shenanigans that go in the background. And then you saw Alok Sharma, whatever your political views are, literally in tears on the last day. But I think at that moment for us in Britain, it became mainstream because we were hosting the event. I'm not sure it had been mainstream before then, but electric vehicles, in December, I think came to nearly 20% of new cars sold. So I think there has been an increasing realization, across society that things have got to change rapidly. And then the recent tragic events at Ukraine may or may not, let's hope they do, serve at least one positive purpose in the horror of what's happening, to make us realize that we all need to rapidly improve the way we generate our electricity. So at work, we leaving the scopes, and we'll come on to scopes 1, 2, and 3, I'm sure in due course, but we focused on getting as many credentials and accreditations as we could, telling everybody all about it with YouTubes and videos and town hall meetings, improving our recycling internally, making sure our technology was the latest, greatest, and greenest, looking at our internal transport at Jigsaw, looking, of course, at our buildings, which doesn't begin and end with insulation, but that's a big part of it. Our office procedures, to what degree our accounts and marketing say 100% digital. The food and the drink that we have in the office, and now we've got oat milk in all the fridges, and it's only fair trade coffee. Then we've worked out some e-trade partnerships for recycling, and we've done salary sacrifice. Obviously, we're moving to renewable energy, working with the Woodland Trust, Viola on recycling. Where do we get our energy from? And then practical stuff in our warehouse. So we've come up with a sort of Jigsaw24 tree, which is a rather strange tree, because the things that we've done, it's a 6 foot tall sort of infographic design of a tree. And what's in the branches, and there are 11 branches now of the categories I've just read out to you, are things that we've done. And then in the roots are plans that we're going to have. And I'm aware this has no statutory greenhouse gas protocol direct link whatsoever, but I wanted to make it real for everybody at work, because only if it's real do you truly understand. So what we're aiming for is a strange looking tree whereby in the end there are no roots, because there are no plans, because we've done everything. and therefore there are more more branches because there are more things that we've done. We've probably done about 150 initiatives now. We've realized that Jigsaw straight away, having optimized the building and done so many things in so many areas, that the next big challenges we face are with employee travel and with couriers. We're 80% now with renewable energy. We've got to get to 100%. And then we're going to start maybe a little bit behind Craig on the customer propositions of things, but we thought we should get it all right ourselves internally first. And so we're working very, very hard on employees at the moment. And that's why we've recently signed up with Octopus EV for a salary sacrifice scheme. And we've now got about 15% of our workforce have bought or leased their own electric vehicle in the last 3 or 4 months. So that's really taken off far, far better than we possibly could have thought. So we're trying to make it real for everybody and just talk about it loads and loads and loads. That's really what we've been doing.
Well, thank you, Roger. Matthew, Roger mentioned scope 1 and 2. It would be good if you could just inform everybody what that actually means, and then linking it into the work that you've been doing with Sims.
It's so good to hear what Craig was saying, because, you know, you think about these products that are being retailed by, you know, Jigsaw and Sims and what have you, and obviously they're manufactured somewhere, transported into this country, retailed or wholesaled, and then used, and then at some point in the future they hopefully end up with a company that, you know, such as the one that Craig helps run, because, yeah, that is the product life cycle in a nutshell. And I do think that this country has created some quite strong regulation around waste, but sadly it has been, how would you say, gamed slightly, is that the right term, Craig? Where I think some businesses have relied far too much on exporting waste of all types, in particular e-waste. And I know that China, about 2 or 3 years ago, wrote to the WTO and said, we will no longer accept plastic waste from these countries. And I think Malaysia did the same. So you can start to see that countries have become very upset and, you know, disenfranchised about the you know, waste coming from the West, and quite rightly so. So I think Craig's in the right place at the right time, because we are going to have to deal much more so with the waste that we generate ourselves, and this ability or this opportunity to export is sort of starting to go away. I mean, it's the same with metal recycling. I mean, metals are a really obvious product, a material that can be very, very recycled very easily, and hardly any of that well, it does get exported, but it also gets used in this country and maybe in Western Europe and the near continent. And then it's so good to hear what Roger just said, because, you know, 150 initiatives in and you're already starting to make an impact. So presumably, Roger, you're measuring your carbon footprint regularly, and maybe possibly starting to, I think you said you had an 80% renewable generation now. So what, 80% of your energy use is being met by on-site renewables? Is that what you meant?
No, we generate 80% of the electricity that we buy comes from renewable sources.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
Yes,
but if you can see within business, sorry, Roger. Within business, you know, obviously, if every business in UK PLC was 150 initiatives into this topic, we would be in a very, very strong position. I imagine that many businesses have done absolutely nothing, but you know, it's so good to hear that Craig's tackling the waste and Roger's tackling the sort of operational emissions, and you know, these are the things that net zero really needs. And then coming back to Andrew's question, well, there are 3 scopes in a standard sort of carbon footprint. Scope 1 are fossil fuels that are combusted, so diesel, petrol, oil, LPG, biodiesel, wood fuels, anything like that is a scope 1 emission. There are technicalities around biodiesel and biofuels, but yeah, essentially they're scope 1 emissions, anything that can be combusted. Scope 2 for most businesses is electricity, grid electricity, but it can include the purchases and use of heat or steam. So some, breweries, for example, hospitals, processing industries can also use a lot of heat and steam as well, and that can be purchased from a grid or a network. And those two scopes, scope 1 and 2, are sometimes called operational emissions. So those are the emissions that a business has the direct control over. So when Roger's, you talked about 150 initiatives, those are really tackling, probably primarily tackling your scope 1 and 2 emissions. And then scope 3 emissions is everything in emissions associated with supply chains, whether they're your upstream supply chain, so your products and services coming in, or your downstream, so that's your products or your waste and what have you going out of the business. And that's very difficult. Those are indirect emissions that you have only have some control over, and they can often be quite hard to measure. So those three things together, Andrew, are what constitutes a standard carbon footprint.
And just sort of briefly, it'd be great if you could share what we've been doing here at Sims, certainly around scope 1 and 2, and the work that we've been doing with yourself.
So when we met, we discussed, net zero 2015. I think that was, COP26 was sort of happening, and net zero 2050 was becoming a relatively, a much more commonly discussed policy in this country. So Andrew asked me to look at the first footprint for Sims, which is what we've called the baseline carbon footprint. So we've measured as much as we can using the data that was available. We've had to make 1 or 2 minor estimates for a few things, but essentially we've endeavoured to capture as much as the greenhouse gas emissions from Sims. And we have produced now to date, we've produced 3 carbon footprints. So we're pretty much up to date. We now have 3 years worth of carbon emission data. We have a set of metrics that we're tracking over time. And we now have, Sims has a carbon reduction strategy, and we are implementing the first annual action plan that looks to tackle primarily scope 1 and 2 emissions. So for example, we've just written a brief for the business in Kent to look at the adoption of renewable energy, for example. That might go on to things like the use of heat pumps and battery storage. Andrew's been discussing with staff about the use or the adoption of electric vehicles. I think did you say, Andrew, there are 2 electric vehicles in the fleet already?
We're very proud of that. I'm very proud to drive around in an electric green Mini. We're subject that a van can has got the capacity to do the miles. We're hopefully going to have an electric van, which will bring probably about 80% of our products into Sims and from our suppliers. And like Roger, perhaps not the same uptake, we're also offering the salary sacrifice scheme to encourage colleagues to consider electric, and certainly we'll be putting more EV charge points at Sims in the next quarter. So it's not quite as glamorous as Roger's Electric Avenue, which I don't know how many charge points you got, Roger. It's in Nottingham.
We've got 2 at the moment, and we're about to get our 3rd and our 4th. We've got an old lift shaft we're covering up, which will improve our insulation. It's the last bit we need to do to optimize the building, and that will create 2 more spaces. We've got another office where we're looking to build some as well. So, but they're getting fuller and fuller. We're going to have to start discussing etiquette now, which is great. That's what you want there. I mean, at the start, it was just me, so I could fill it up anytime I want or charge up. Now we're having to start to get to a point where we'll be prioritize those who've commuted in longer distances, and that's what we want. It's fantastic to see. There's a real.
Craig, is there anything at Stone regarding EV, or is that something you're looking at, or do you have already in place?
Yeah, definitely. So I chair our sustainability team at Stone, and very similar initiatives to what Matt and Roger and yourself were saying there. So I've got an electric vehicle myself, where we've got 4 charging ports at Stone, and we're currently looking at the electric vehicle on the vans and trucks as well, but a bit similar to what you were saying, Andrew. Obviously, like with the distance, it's difficult to like the technology is just not quite there at the moment, which is frustrating in itself. But we're quite lucky in the respect that we supply equipment and take equipment back. So if we're doing a collection in Leeds, for example, what we will do is we'll do a delivery in Leeds at the same time. So there's never a wasted leg of a journey from either point of view. So that whole sustainability journey from a customer point of view starts straight away on that.
And I think for all of our organisations, the commute is creates a big footprint, and it would appear that we're all collectively, in our own ways, taking action there. And I think the sacrifice scheme with EV points is a good way. So going back to Mr. Attenborough, are we going to witness a wonderful recovery? At least we're trying to contribute to that. Roger, you gave me a wonderful stat about what we could actually get from the sun. Would you like to share that with our listeners?
It's quite frightening. If you think about the entire world's energy needs for a full year, terawatts, it's huge. The entire world's energy needs for a full year. The sun generates that every hour. This thermonuclear device, which wakes up in the morning, always works. It's never ill. It's always there. It always delivers. And the problem is at our end, we're not harnessing that power. And that's just solar. And if you did that, we need to become 0.1% efficient. If we could harness 0.1% of the sun's energy, that is to say, like I said, enough power for a year is generated every hour. We wouldn't need any wind, wouldn't need anything else. So it just shows what can be done, and the technology that's starting to come through, double-sided solar panels that work better almost when it's getting darker, solar panels that work in better and cloudier weather. Soon we'll have some element of photovoltaic cells within windows. Think about blocks of flats and so on. Think about Hong Kong or somewhere with high-rise buildings. So technology is going to play a huge role, but this is where humanity needs to try and get a balance, because just because technology is going to play a great role doesn't mean that we shouldn't change our behavior, because we've all got to change our behavior. This runs at an industry, at an individual, and a family, and a community level. It works at a company or organizational level, a sector or industry level, and then by nation. We've all got to get on with it.
So picking up on that, Roger, we are the three businesses very much in the IT industry. I'll be really interested, starting with Craig, do you think as a collective, the IT industry is doing a good job, or do you think clearly there's always more to do? What's your feeling about the industry we work in?
My view on it is that, and it may be a bit different to other people on the call, because I'm seeing it from a different side really, but I think in the UK, I think there's a requirement to be seen to have the latest stuff. A lot of the time in the UK, people want to buy new devices all the time, even at home. It always has to be the latest device that we have to buy, and it takes a lot of resource to manufacture a new device. Like for a typical PC, you're talking over 1.5 tons of water, 21 kg of chemicals, over 240 kg of fossil fuels going into manufacturing one piece of equipment. That's before you've even got it to the UK, because most of the time these items and all the parts that make a computer are manufactured in other countries and getting it over. And you look at the car industry, like when you buy a new car, it tends to have another 3 or 4 owners once you've brought a car. You don't have a car and then it ends up being deported to another country. And I think we need to get a bit more savvy within the UK about using refurbished equipment a lot more. Like my laptop in front of me is 5 years old, more than adequate for what I need to use it for. And I think a lot of the time, if people just had a bit of a think about what they're using, like could an 8th or 9th gen laptop do the job that they're doing, rather than having to go out there and buy new every single time, would certainly have a massive impact in terms of all these things that are going on in other countries where they're manufacturing these devices. And I think it's something that we all need to get a bit smarter on, and say all these things that we're all talking about, they do all link to each other in particular ways. And it's just one big conversation about, it's more an educational piece to people, really making them aware of it. And that's why this conversation is brilliant, and hearing all these exciting things that are going on within the different businesses, because ultimately we all want the same thing. We might be seeing it from different points of views and different parts of the IT elements, but it's really interesting how it all comes together.
Oh, well, thank you. And Roger, your view, clearly, I'm sure many of our listeners would have read or heard you. But what's your view on how we in the IT community are dealing with the crisis, as Mr. Attenborough would say?
Well, I think CRN, I'm not saying they're the industry standard, but I think they are very well respected as probably the industry standard in terms of channel reseller news, the what is now a daily email. It used to be a newsletter, of course, but they've held the Tech Impact Awards for the first time last year, which were obviously and necessarily held remotely. That partly came out of COVID, I think, and an increasing sense of what should be done. And I think they have helped show the way. And I think the innate, natural, competitive nature of the IT sector, which is one of the things that makes it such a joyous place to work, I think has helped too. And if there is a fight or a battle or a contest for getting the right accreditations, just as there might have been a few years ago for getting the first gender pay gap report out, then if we need to channel each other's competitive instincts to achieve a noble aim, then that's fine by me. Whatever the excuse is, be it reputational gain, ego, competitiveness, financial gain, carrot or stick, then we're moving on towards things like carbon taxation. My view is throw it all in, whatever it takes. We've got to get there. You've just used the phrase, Rourke, and you're correct. If there is an emergency out there, it is an emergency. And we have all got to work incredibly hard, not only to get to 2050, but to try and be along the path by 2030, or it's going to be dreadful.
Yeah.
So we've got to get going.
And Matthew, you've obviously got the benefit of working with a number of organisations outside the IT industry, but clearly with Sims within the IT industry. What's your view as an industry how we're doing?
Well, I mean, I guess when I've got to know your business, Andrew, I mean, it's well, typically for the IT sector, it's a very sort of clean sort of business, efficiently run. The carbon emissions the scope 1 and 2 emissions are very modest. And I suspect for a business of your scale, it was roughly 30, 35 staff, something like that. I mean, they are quite modest.
Yeah, 30 people, yeah, 30 colleagues, yeah.
Yeah, the emissions are quite modest. The metrics, you're a small business, relatively speaking, I guess. If you compare yourself, I think I tried to do some basic benchmarking in the first report I did for you. And I think, sustainability, carbon metric information is notoriously hard to find on the web. And even when you do find it, you have to sort of, raise your eyebrow a bit and sort of, critique it and make sure you're actually looking at something that's credible. But the benchmarks I could find suggested that you're definitely below average. I mean, I didn't have many data points, and I think we'll look to improve that as we go on. But I think it's quite a clean business in that sense. But of course, you're all exposed to the use of fossil fuels. Even clean grid electricity has a carbon footprint. You're all using diesel and petrol directly or indirectly, and you're all very reliant on transport to get these products moving around within the UK. And obviously they have to come into the country in the first place most of the time. So in that sense,
your thoughts, Matthew, on as a collective, do you think the IT industry on the whole, when you compare it to other businesses that you work outside IT?
Well, I was going to say, that other companies are in exactly the same position, Andrew. All businesses that are moving product around and to a lesser extent services are very, very exposed to fossil fuels. And this is what Net Zero 2050 says. You have to have, it's looking for a significant and rapid reduction in the use of fossil fuels. I mean, sadly, the COVID experience has suddenly and urgently required all businesses to work in a very different way. And, the carbon footprints that predate COVID for the relevant emissions will be much, much lower. And I'm beginning to see that businesses, some of my clients, are considering very much hybrid working. They are considering not releasing buildings. They're considering selling property. So they are, already done all the basic things like fair trade, tea and coffee and that kind of stuff, but they're now looking to much more fundamental changes in the way they operate their businesses. And it's very good to see, actually. I'm not saying all businesses are responding in exactly the same way, but I am surprised about the type of business and the type of business people who are now starting to pay attention to this topic. And it has taken people like David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg to do this. I mean, I've been working in this sector for quite a long time, and it's only really since Greta Thunberg started her strike, her school strike, was it called Strike for Climate, School Strike for Climate, that actually people have really started to pay proper attention to this. And I think it's been supported. I mean, what's helped in this country is that we've actually got some very forward-looking, very stringent, very innovative policies around energy in this country. I mean, the banning of diesel and petrol vehicles by 2030 or thereabouts, 2035. Our grid electricity has already been decarbonised. We've decoupled carbon emissions from GDP and so on and so forth. I mean, businesses can still thrive and prosper under net zero 50 without, you don't have to destroy your business model to take on net zero into your business. It's a very, very doable thing, net zero 2050, and everything that Roger and Craig has mentioned so far is within net zero 2050. Whether you knew it or not, it's there.
I couldn't agree more. I think for us, it's been, for Jigsaw24, it's been something fantastic to bond people together and to connect people emotionally with what we're trying to do, a sense of bold mission and purpose that aligns with our values. We've now just brought out Jigsaw24's first social impact report when we talk about the environment, but not only that, and sustainability, we're talking about well-being, diversity, inclusion, charity and charitable giving. But I think what this has also done is made us all realize the key importance of cutting out waste and getting clarity of thought. I think that's so important too. For me, one of the big things, as well as people like Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough, and then the COP26 publicity, it's about making it real. And I think what we've tried to do at work with our Jigsaw24 tree, you've got to make it real. I'm not a particular fan about McDonald's, but I talk about McDonald's a lot more now because of their McPlant. And I know it's not perfect, and there may be a greenwashing element, and one thinks, well, classic American corporation, why should we trust them? But it is recognized by the vegan society. But a lot of people go to McDonald's, and so I've talked about that. And then the fact that now we can all see, everybody knows somebody who's got an electric vehicle. I couldn't have made that statement even 1 year ago. So suddenly it is real. And, the McDonald's may be a silly example, but we've talked to people at work and said, look, this is what you need to do. You need to download the PawPrint app. And the PawPrint app, PAWPRINT, isn't a perfect carbon tracker, but it gives you a rough idea. Think about what you're doing at home. Think about insulation, going cashless, use Apple Pay, green energy, eco cleaning products, LED bulbs. Think about travel. Can you use more public transport, cycling, diet? Well, you might not want to become a vegan. That word may put you off, but try and be vegetarian, or try just one meal a week to eat less meat. Just eat less meat and try oat milk because it doesn't split with hot drinks. People think, oh, well, that's going to taste funny. No, it doesn't. It's fine. And so at home, traveling, with diet, if you can just try and do a few things and talk to other people. And we've got this sense of sort of collegiate commitment now, which is quite infectious, because I think hope is infectious. And I think it's very, very important to do all these things, as well as all the accreditations and the data, which of course need to be responsibly followed.
Thank you, and I absolutely well said, Roger. I totally agree. I think perhaps it would be good for our listeners to hear outside work what individually we are doing, or how we live our lives, or what changes we've made. So really putting you on the spot, Craig, away from Stone, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners about what happens at home with you and green initiatives that you might have in place or thinking of putting in place?
Yeah, as we said earlier, like obviously I went to an electric vehicle for the first time in October last year, and I absolutely love the vehicle. To be honest, compared to like what it was and like the ease of using it, and like the functionality of how easy it is to charge those vehicles now is absolutely fantastic. But like what I love about like the home life at the moment is like my children are so educated through school now, in terms of like they raise questions about like what things go in what wheelie bins and that sort of stuff, and they're really so into sustainability, so much more so than when I was at school. Like we didn't really understand it when we were at school, but that's part and parcel of what they live and breathe now. There's so many questions being asked. Like when I do an interview now, one of the questions that you always get asked is like, what's Stone doing from a sustainability point of view? People want to know these things before they leave now, and that does impact on your home life in terms of like what you do. Exactly what Roger was saying with the meat side of things there as well. Like as a family, that's something that we try to do a couple of times a week, as like limit like what we're eating from that side of things, because it's making a big difference. And that word that Roger said as well, purpose, like that, having that purpose and believe that you're doing something good, it reflects well in your personal life, but then on your outer family, your friends, when you're talking about it, like you seem to be talking about these subjects so much more outside of work and inside of work at the moment.
Yeah, 100% agree. And Matthew, from your side?
Well, yes, I gave up my trusty 20-year-old petrol car a couple of years ago. Well, we actually sold both our petrol cars and bought one EV, which we absolutely love. That's been a great change. Not without its, it is a costly purchase, but the running costs are incredibly low, particularly when you couple them with a cheap overnight charging tariff, such as those provided by companies like Octopus Energy, for example. So very, very exciting sort of product to get to grips with. I live in a well-insulated, well-draft-proofed house. I cycle and walk as much as I can. I'm a near-perfect vegetarian, not most of the time, but no.
Do you have oat milk in your coffee?
Not always, I'm afraid to say. Certainly, I think we dabbled with almond milk originally, but of course, almonds are a fairly water-intensive crop. But certainly we try and buy local food, fruit and vegetables as much as we can. And what else? I'm a bit of a fixer-upper, so I try and mend things as much as I can. Lots of recycling. So generally just try and purchase kind of very, without using the word frugal, which sounds a bit boring. I don't try and buy everything that I absolutely want, but focus those purchases on the things I actually need. But far from perfect, but probably a lot better than I was a couple of years ago.
And Roger,
I won't repeat what the others have said, but I've gone to an eco tariff, and obviously it's very difficult for people this year. And I think we all need to show great empathy, because sometimes people are not in a position to buy an EV, and some people are in a position because as Matt has just said, the initial purchase is high. So I've always said to people, you're not failing if you're not becoming a vegan. I'm not a vegan, I'm not even a vegetarian, but I definitely eat less meat. I try and give to some eco charities every month. We're using compostable bin bags at work. I'm just reading from my list that stuff that hasn't been repeated so far. Trying to do cashless. I've tried to cut out cash completely. We had a chance recently to replace our oven at home, so I replaced the gas oven with electric. We were going to buy a Christmas tree this year. We didn't. Well, we did. We got a plastic one, and that's it now, forever. We got the best eco one we could find that was artificial, but we're never going to buy another Christmas tree. I've moved my pension scheme to a sustainable fund. We use EcoVer, dishwasher tablets, and so on. EV cars. So just trying to do everything. And insulation. I mean, that's the obvious thing, isn't it? To try and cut out waste wherever possible, because it's an obvious point to make. We've got a colleague who works in our warehouse manager, and he's got a well-insulated property, and he says, if I cook a Sunday roast, what I sometimes try and do is open the fridge, open the oven afterwards, leave it, and then all the heat comes in. And he says, it gets absorbed into the system he's got in his house, and it ends up heating the house for some of the week. It sounds a bit crazy, but any wasted energy just seems such a shame. So we've got to try and harness that with common sense. We've got to grow your own veg competition at work as well. That's gone down really well.
I think appliances, Roger, when you mentioned appliances, I mean, I thought that's a really, really good one. I mean, I replaced an oven a couple of years ago during one of my early lockdown projects, and we took an oven out and put a new one in, and it went from 7.5 kilowatts to about 4.5, and it does exactly the same. It is no different in terms of its performance. We got rid of 3 across the house and the shed. We got rid of 3 fridges and went down to 1. So I think actually replacing appliances in households, if you've not done it for a few years, you can get some significant improvements just from fridges and freezers and basic appliances, which really surprised me, actually. And the same goes in businesses. I mean, one of my clients, I won't mention their name, but the number of fridges and toasters and kettles around their business is horrifying. And, they're all of various ages. So the use of appliances in workplaces can sometimes be overlooked, I think.
The big things are generating electricity, which to some degree is what the government have got to get on with. And hopefully the tragic events in Ukraine have given them a kick up the arse to get moving on that more quickly, because this is a war. And I heard a quote the weekend that if we could have got the vaccines organized in just over a year for COVID, then we need to start accelerating the use of wind. But the other big things are for us as an industry, which you talked about earlier on, Andrew, is getting the couriers to move because to electric, to EVs, because as Craig said earlier, too many products sold in the IT sector already are manufactured overseas. But then we add insult to injury by transporting them with dirty diesel fueled vehicles up and down the country. That's really important. And employee travel, that's one we've really pushed on with staff at work here at Jigsaw. So how do you get to work? Can you walk? Can you jog? Can you cycle? Can you car share? Can you use public transport? Can you use an EV? Try and do anything other than travel on your own in an internal combustion engine car. So we've given out interest-free loans for season tickets for public transport as well. And we're re-pushing the thing that Gordon Brown launched 1 million years ago, which was salary sacrifice on bikes. Bikes are really quite attractive now. They're becoming high tech. So we're having another push on that to see if we can get more people riding bikes to work. There's so many things that can be done.
Okay. One very last question. If the 4 of us were having dinner and there was a 5th place available at the table, these are both great people, but I'll be interested, who would you have, Greta or David? Roger.
I'd have Greta, being blunt, because she's younger. David would be a sense of indulgence and enjoyment to listen to him, but Greta, because one of her phrases I liked, because we've got to be pragmatic and sensible about this, but we've also got to be angry. And she once said, I want you to feel the panic I feel. I want you to feel the fear. And we need to be angry as well as pragmatic. And I think she's got the energy to hopefully play a leading role in years to come. So Greta for me.
Okay, Craig?
It's a very difficult question, Andrew. That is. I think I'd go with David. Personally, I just think they've obviously both seen so much out there, but as Roger said, like his way of words and to be able to listen to him, I think he could talk for the whole dinner and just be in awe the whole time of some of the things that he's got to say. So I'd go with David.
Matthew?
Well, I think we could. Who's most likely to turn up? Yeah, I reckon Greta would probably say thank you for the invitation, but I won't make an unnecessary journey. So yeah, I'd go David, I think, just for personal amusement alone. But yeah.
Well,
David probably wouldn't turn up either, to be honest. We need a reserve. We need a reserve.
Gentlemen, we're so grateful for your time, and I think it would be appropriate, I'm sure I speak for all of us, Ukraine was mentioned a couple of times in the podcast, and I think it's absolutely right to say all our thoughts are with those brave people in Ukraine, and we certainly wish them well. But I'd like to thank you and wish you all well, and hope that some of the insights, both in our business and personal lives, around sustainability, people have enjoyed, and many thanks to you all. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.